Hello! Today we are looking at those pesky chains which just don't seem to like staying on the chainrings. With these tips and remedies, hopefully that will soon be a thing of the past. Drop chains are something that can affect all of us, honestly. However good we get at riding, it's not only annoying and time consuming, but it can also damage frames, and in severe cases it can cause crashes and injury. So it's really best avoided. Now, this might sound obvious, but if your chain has started to come off frequently when it didn't in the past, then something in your bike setup has clearly changed. Maybe your kids have knocked it over, or maybe something's come loose. This is a good place to start. The first thing to do is check that all of your drivetrain bolts are tight. Think crank arm bolts, think chainring bolts, and mech and hanger. If anything has clearly moved, then that is likely to be the problem. You should also make sure that your rear wheel is correctly seated in the dropouts if you're still using quick release. If you checked all of that and not found the problem, then it's time to delve a little deeper. So let's take a look at how you deal with other possible reasons that your chain is coming off. So, if your chain comes off the front, now whether your chain drops off the inside or outside of the chain rings, then you're going to need to take a look at the front derailleur limit screws. If the chain most regularly drops off the frame side, then this indicates that the low limit screw needs to be adjusted, and if it drops off the outside towards your foot, then it's the upper one that you'll need to start focusing on. If your eyesight is decent, then you'll notice that the low limit screw is marked with an L and the high one with a H. We'll start by checking that the lower limit is in the right place, and to do that we're going to put the chain on the smallest chainring and the largest or easiest sprocket at the back. We then want this inner plate on the front derailleur cage to be nearly, but not quite touching the chain. A gap of about 1 or 2 millimeters would be perfect, so we're going to need to move this in quite a bit closer. We're going to do that by turning the L screw counterclockwise to move the inner plate of the front derailleur cage outboard. Thankfully, this is a relatively straightforward process and you are only going to need a couple of tools for the job. It does depend on your system. For the Shimano Ultegra R8000 group set that we have behind us, 2mm Allen key is all we need, but some older group sets or different brands will require a screwdriver. That's just a Phillips head. Really though, you want a Japanese industrial screwdriver, but you know, that's if you want to buy one. If you're really bad at judging distances like I am, then you can always use a small Allen key slotted in between the chain and the inner plate to double check. Now that we've sorted the lower limit, we're going to do a very similar process to adjust the upper limit. For this, we're going to need the bike in the biggest chainring at the front and the smallest sprocket at the back. That's not really a gear that I find myself being able to turn very often. Once again, you're looking for a gap of 1 to 2 millimeters, but this time it's in between the chain and the outer plate of the front mech. If it is larger than that, then you'll need to turn the H screw counterclockwise, and you'll see the cage move inwards. If the chain is in contact with the outer plate, then you'll need to turn the H screw clockwise until you get that magic 1 to 2 millimeter gap. Of course, even if you've done this perfectly, then it is still possible to occasionally unship your chain, particularly if you change gear under load. That is why you should back off your effort with your feet slightly when shifting between chainrings, especially if you are standing up on the pedals or if you're pushing hard. Another way to keep the chain from coming off the inside of the chain set is to use a chain catcher. These small additions are easy to fit and can prevent potentially costly mechanicals, and are particularly useful if you're using oval chainrings. For me though, on these chainrings, I don't think they're needed. You can adjust the rear derailleur's limits with the chain removed or with it still on. If the chain is coming off the inside and dropping down between the spokes and cassette, then it's the lower limit screw that will need adjusting, and the chain will need to be in the smallest chainring at the front and the largest sprocket at the rear. Turning the L screw clockwise will move this hanging down bit of the derailleur, known as the cage, away from the center of the bike. You'll need to move this to the point where the chain can move freely into the largest sprocket, but not go any further than that. Test going in and out of the gear with the bike in a stand or upside down, as it's much better to find a problem now than when you're out on the road. If your chain is instead coming off the outside of the cassette, then put the chain into the larger chainring and the smallest rear sprocket. Turn the H screw clockwise until you see the rear derailleur cage start to move towards the center of the bike, until the chain can move freely into the smallest sprocket, but it can go no further than that. Again though, if the chain wasn't coming off before, but has recently developed the habit, the setup has somehow changed. Check that the rear wheel is sitting correctly in the dropouts with the rim running centrally in the chainstays, and make sure that the rear derailleur and its hanger, that's the piece to which the rear derailleur is bolted, aren't bent. In most cases, the rear derailleur pulleys should be lined up directly underneath one another, so look at the bike from the back and check that this part is vertical. If you do all of this and your chain is still coming off, there are several other things to look at. Firstly, your front derailleur could have moved and you'll need to check that it's positioned correctly. We don't have time for that in this video, but leave a comment if you'd find a separate video just for this beneficial, and in the meantime, take a look at our article on how to index front gears on the road.cc website. You'll also need to check if your drivetrain is worn and in need of replacement parts. Shifting performance can start to become less smooth and more erratic as components near the end of their useful lives, not to mention the chain slipping under high loads. You can get handy tools that help monitor chain wear, and they cost peanuts. Now personally, this is happening to my winter bike. Chain has started falling off the big ring. It's a problem that I'm going to have to address with a new chain ring. Even if your chain isn't worn, it's still not going to work right if it has a bent or a stiff link, or has maybe become clogged up with dirt. A visual inspection while turning the cranks should reveal if there's a problem here. Take a close look at every link, looking for any cracks or rust, and keep it well lubricated, especially in this bad winter weather. You'll also want to look over the chainring. Check every tooth, looking for bent or damaged teeth, and that the ring itself is straight. Chainrings aren't always that easy to tell when they're worn, so you're looking for sharp teeth and the trough in the middle of the teeth becoming asymmetrical. If you've just put a new chain on and it keeps dropping, then it's likely to be either the chainring or cassette that is also worn out. It could also be that you're running the chain at too extreme an angle, known as cross-chaining. This not only increases the wear on the drivetrain and is less efficient, but not all systems can cope and it will chuck the chain off. You'll also run into problems if your chain is too long or too short, but of course this isn't likely to change overnight. Before putting a chain on, thread it into the larger chainring and the largest sprocket, but don't run it through the rear derailleur. Pull the two ends together and add one complete link, that's one inner and one outer half link, to get the correct chain length. This may change with your system, so just take that as a rough guide. Now, I spent ages trying the methods that we've mentioned and nothing was working. I then found that the second-hand bike I'd bought had been sent with the wrong speed chain on. You know, I should have checked. Of course, there are other reasons why your chain could come off as well, but this should solve the majority of issues. If you think there's an important cause that we've missed, tell us about it down below. Now, if you found this content useful, then please drop us a like and subscribe to the channel for more like this. We'll see you in the next one.